The roar of cannons tore through the salt-soaked air as a merchant vessel fought desperately to outrun its pursuers. Sails strained, ropes snapped. Crew members shouted orders over the chaos, but it was already too late. On the horizon, a black flag climbed the mast of an approaching ship, and with it came the certainty of violence. This was not just another pirate raid. The ones leading this attack were not the grizzled, bearded men of legend. They were two women whose names would become synonymous with fear across the Caribbean: Bonny and Mary Read, among the most fearsome pirates of the early 18th century. This was the golden age of piracy, a brutal era spanning roughly from 1650 to 1730, when the waters of the Caribbean became a battleground for fortune, freedom, and survival. During this time, Bonny and Read defied every social norm their world had constructed. Unlike the mythical pirate queens of fiction, these women were real. They were armed, they were ruthless, and they were anything but symbols. Operating primarily in the West Indies, especially near New Providence in the Bahamas, they sailed aboard a pirate sloop called the Revenge, commanded by the infamous Calico Jack Rackham. But many contemporary accounts suggest that it was Bonny and Read, not Rackham, who inspired the most terror among those unlucky enough to cross their path. According to Captain Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, published in 1724, and considered one of the most important sources on piracy from the period, both women dressed as men during combat, but they made no effort to conceal their identities when asserting authority over captured crews. Johnson wrote that they were as active and ready to board or undertake anything that was hazardous as any man aboard captured. Sailors were often stunned to discover they had been overwhelmed by women wielding cutlasses and pistols with unflinching brutality. These were not passive participants in piracy. They did not merely accompany male pirates. They fought, they captured, they punished, and they did so just as harshly as any man who ever raised a black flag. Sailors who resisted were often cut down on deck where they stood. Those who surrendered were sometimes taken captive, subjected to forced labor, confinement, or worse. The sea offered no mercy, and neither did Bonny and Read. Dim lantern light flickered across the damp timber walls of the ship's hold. The stench of salt, sweat, and rot hung heavy in the stale air. Shackled by iron cuffs, captives taken by pirates often found themselves confined in the darkest recesses of the vessel, in the prison hold, a space barely fit for cargo and utterly unfit for human life. Among the pirate crews of the Caribbean, Bonny and Mary Read were known not only for their ferocity in battle, but for their equal participation in the capture and containment of prisoners. Historical records, including court depositions from captured pirates, confirm that prisoners, whether captured sailors, merchants, or informers, were routinely chained below deck, often for days or weeks without release. The purpose of these below-deck confinements varied depending on the captive's perceived value. Some were held for ransom, particularly if they were wealthy merchants or officers whose families might pay for their return. Others were kept as forced labor, compelled to repair sails, pump water, or cook for the crew under constant threat of violence. Many were simply kept alive until pirates could determine their usefulness, or until the next port where they might be sold or exchanged like livestock. Conditions in these makeshift prisons were harsh by any standard. Most pirate ships lacked formal brig structures, so prisoners were often shackled to beams or bulkheads, forced to lie in their own filth, enduring oppressive heat, infestations of vermin, and chronic thirst. In one Royal Navy account describing the Revenge, the very ship used by Calico Jack, survivors testified that prisoners were chained in pairs, fed little more than scraps, and rarely brought above deck. The hold became a tomb for the living, a place where time dissolved into darkness and the only certainty was suffering. These below-deck prisons were not merely holding cells. They were tools of terror, deliberate instruments designed to send a message to anyone who might consider resisting a pirate attack. Survival would come at a cost, and that cost was measured in pain, humiliation, and the slow erosion of hope. The rowboat scraped against the shore of a barren cay somewhere in the sprawling Bahamian archipelago. Behind it, the pirate ship drifted at anchor, just long enough for its crew to unload a few casks of water and a small portion of food. Then, without another word, the boat pushed off, oars slicing through the water as the vessel began to recede. On the shore, the prisoners stood, watching, knowing they had been abandoned, marooned. It was the most feared punishment in the age of piracy, and for good reason. Marooning was not a pirate legend. It was a documented practice rooted in maritime custom. In the 17th and early 18th centuries, Caribbean pirates, including crews that Bonny and Mary Read sailed with, used this method to punish mutineers, informants, or captured sailors they deemed too dangerous or useless to keep aboard. Pirates set prisoners ashore on a small island with 1 bottle of powder, 1 bottle of water, and 1 pistol. This was not merely punishment. It was psychological warfare, a warning to others. Aboard, Bonny and Read, whose reputations for severity matched their male counterparts, would have been active participants in such decisions, enforcing the code of fear that sustained pirate discipline. To be marooned was to be erased, out of sight, out of life, left with only the horizon and the slow certainty of death. In the brutal logic of the pirate world, it was the ultimate demonstration that loyalty was the only true currency at sea. The prisoner's shirt was ripped from his back. Ropes tied his arms to the mainmast, binding him tightly. The crew gathered in grim silence, forming a circle around the spectacle. A cat o' nine tails, a whip with multiple knotted cords used for punishment, was raised then, brought down with punishing force. The crack of the lash echoed across the deck. On pirate ships, discipline was maintained through pain, and the whipping post stood as the most visible symbol of that authority. Whipping was not unique to pirates. It was standard punishment across naval vessels in the 17th and 18th centuries. But aboard pirate ships, it took on a sharper edge. Without formal courts or governing law, pirates enforced their own code, known as the Articles of Agreement, often signed by all crew members before embarking. Violating these rules, whether by stealing from fellow pirates, disobeying orders, or showing cowardice in battle, could mean severe flogging. For pirates like Bonny and Mary Read, whose presence was anything but symbolic, such punishments were not hidden away. Contemporary sources describe their active roles during combat, and by extension, it is historically consistent that they also participated in enforcing discipline. While no trial records explicitly state that they themselves administered floggings, pirate crews operated on collective enforcement. All ranks, regardless of gender, could demand punishment for violations. Bonny, in particular, was noted for her violent temperament. She once reportedly threatened to shoot male crewmates who refused to fight, a testament to her authority and willingness to use violence to maintain it. Aboard pirate ships like the Revenge, flogging served both punishment and performance. The sounds of the lash, the cries of the punished, and the presence of armed crew members ensured obedience through fear. The cat o' nine tails, sometimes soaked in brine to intensify the pain and infection, left lasting scars, both physical and psychological. Floggings could number from a dozen to several dozen lashes depending on the offense and the mood of the crew. To defy the code was to offer your back to the mast. The whipping post was more than a place of pain. It was the foundation of pirate order, reminding every soul aboard that freedom under the black flag came with brutal consequence. Beneath the black flag, women like Bonny and Mary Read proved that terror at sea knew no gender. Their actions, violent, methodical, and unflinching, shattered the conventions of their time and revealed a darker truth. In lawless waters, power was claimed not by birth or title, but by brutality, fear, and iron resolve. The legacy of these female pirates forces us to confront a question that history rarely asks aloud. When the oppressed become the enforcers, what does justice truly mean? Comment below. Were Bonny and Read symbols of resistance against a male-dominated world, or enforcers of the very cruelty they appeared to defy? As Captain Charles Johnson recorded in 1724, describing Bonny's fury at her crew's surrender, "If you had fought like men, You need not have been hanged like dogs. That voice still echoes, less a cry of defiance than a grim reminder of who ruled the sea when law fell silent.